What if you're a pastor who is leading the charge in a ministry that is flourishing, but you personally are a minister who is not flourishing? And you don't even have to have a flourishing ministry to be personally flourishing. You could also have a ministry that's not going so well and you find yourself struggling. But more often than not, pastors are in this serving role and in a helping vocation where they actually find that though they are helping everybody else, they are neglecting their own well-being and their own care. On this episode of the Life After Ministry podcast, got to sit down and talk with Chris Adams, who's the executive director of Flourishing in Ministry. We happened to catch him on his drive into work. He was stuck in that LA traffic. But we talked about what does flourishing in ministry look like and what is pushing against it. And he's really part of coaching ministry leaders into daily well-being, resilience, thriving, and authenticity. And I know that for many of you listening, you're on the struggle bus and you're trying to figure out, is this really what I signed up for? And you're thinking about, I wonder if I need to transition out. He talks about what are some of those ways that we can really to be able to develop this habit and routine of caring for ourselves regularly. And what are the signs and indicators that we might need to stop and take a break and come out of vocational ministry for a season or for longer? Wherever you're at, we hope that this podcast episode is helpful for you. All right. Well, hey, Chris Adams, Executive Director for Flourishing in Ministry. Welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast. It's good to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. Such an honor to be with you. I really appreciate the opportunity to think together and hopefully be an encouragement to your listeners.
Yeah, well, and for those of you who are listening, you might hear a little bit of that LA traffic in the background there. You're on your way to the office and didn't quite make it there in time, but we decided let's have a conversation as you drive.
Yeah, I hope it's not too distracting, so sorry about that, but I really appreciate the opportunity.
It brings me right back to LA, so it's a beautiful reminder.
You're catching Chris, a wind of my daily stress of commuting in LA.
That's right. Well, you're not flourishing on the freeway, but hopefully in ministry.
That's
so
right.
That's okay.
That's right.
Tell me about a little bit of your background, ministry, familiarity, and what that's led you up to today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a third generation pastor's kid. My grandfather was a pastor of mostly small, what I call clergy-killing kind of congregations in New England. Most of his ministry, he's one of my ministry heroes. And my dad is now, he just turned 80, and he's still active in music ministry, has been his entire life since childhood. And so grew up in a music ministry home, both local church context as well as he traveled some in different seasons of his life. So I was just in hundreds and hundreds of pastors' homes all my life. And I think in retrospect, the Lord was shaping something in me that would later become a big part of what God's called me to do and I'm privileged to do. And I have some years in pastoral ministry myself as a local church associate pastor and as a university chaplain. And ended up becoming a psychologist specializing in working with pastors and missionaries and their families and ministry leaders more broadly. And it's a great joy and great privilege, and I get to meet lots of amazing people who are incredibly faithful, gifted, integrous, wonderful people. So what a joy.
What was it about growing up in the clergy-killing churches, I love that term, that made you say, I still actually want to be a part of this, and didn't make you turn and run the other way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I remember hearing the stories from my grandfather about stress, and he actually died young of a heart attack, and I'm in his early 60s. I'm convinced a lot of that was probably ministry stress and lack of self-care in different ways. But I think on the positive side, I was just so captivated by watching my grandfather and my parents really be obedient to the Lord and just experienced God as a family, and just kind of grew up with that sense that I have a part to play in this larger story that God is unfolding in the world. And felt a real strong sense of call to some kind of ministry myself in junior high, and that just kind of unfolded over time. And I think my parents were a little concerned. They didn't want me to go through ministry pain, and yet they were also supportive at the same time. So they were really honest about how challenging it can be, but also encouraged me to really be obedient to the Lord.
So you got in and you got out and are intact, but
yeah.
I'm curious, as you look at the landscape and you have a pretty good national view of what this looks like, what is the health of the clergy in America these days? What does that look like?
Yeah, great question. And I think if we look at it as a whole, best we can, it's not as terrible as maybe sometimes it's been portrayed in some information that's been released or some circles, but it's also worse than it maybe can or should be for a whole variety of reasons. And the research always lags behind, real life. So I have a sense, just anecdotally, speaking to thousands of clergy every year and spending most of my days with individual clergy and coaching or therapy, that it's post-COVID, it's worse than we've kind of been able to measure so far. I think the amount of burnout and exhaustion and contemplation about leaving ministry is probably a lot higher than what researchers have been able to capture post-COVID, because we're still lagging behind what's actually happening, is my best sense of things. And there are lots of pastors, of course, who are still full of joy and love what they're doing and are flourishing, but it's just been a really, really extraordinarily challenging season in North America through and after COVID.
So do you think that the Barna stat of 42% of pastors are thinking about leaving ministry is low?
It might be a little bit. It might be fairly accurate, and I'd have to dig into the, if I'm going to sound like an academic nerd here, but I'd have to dig into the research methodology that Barna used and stuff to really give an informed opinion about that. But the exhaustion from such a polarized culture politically, and here we come into another election cycle in 2024 for president, and most every pastor I talk to is just like, I don't want to do this again. I don't have it in me. I'm so tired of the polarization, the conflict, and the vitriol with which people will treat one another in the body of Christ, and then also the way that they will treat a pastor is really kind of just beyond the pale at this point. It just gets really old. It's exhausting.
So is there a way in the midst of just the world environment and the landscape that we find ourselves in, do pastors have to just bury their head in the sand? Like I know during the COVID season, it's you really can't win sometimes. It's if you say
Absolutely.
we're gonna wear masks, then half the congregation's upset. If you say we're gonna have freedom and you don't have to wear masks here, then the other half is gonna be upset. So some of these things, it's are you gonna pray for Israel? Are you not gonna pray for Israel? Or what about the Palestinians?
Right.
Like there's all of these different pieces. Are you going to say something politically? And so how do you as a pastor thrive and flourish in environments like this when you're dealing with people who are really on both sides? And these are all we're all in the same body. We're all Christians, believers going the same direction, supposed to be going the same direction, and people are expecting you to split the baby and basically adjudicate and say this is what we're going to do, and you really can't win. How do you flourish?
Yeah, such a great question. I was thinking as you were asking that question, my grandfather had a sermon called "You Can Be So Right You're Wrong," and I think there's a lot of that maybe happening around today, and people aren't willing to sometimes have civil conversations, and like you said, it's just you just can't win no matter what you do or don't do, and people will read things into your sermon you weren't saying, or wish you had said something that supports their political viewpoint, all those kinds of things. But I think what that does psychologically over time is it just requires an incredible amount of what psychologists call self-regulation. It always has to be a pastor, I think, but even more so nowadays, where you're having to maybe put boundaries up with people who are toxic or abusive, and at the same time, not react in a way that would not be a pastoral response in some way. People will just treat you horribly, and then you have to figure out how to respond in a way that is somehow not responding in kind. Doesn't mean we're not assertive and not speaking into how people are behaving, but the question is then what do pastors do with what they're sort of sitting with emotionally and relationally, the residue from all those interactions that they didn't create, they didn't go looking for conflict, it came to them, and so I think taking time to make sure to process all that pastors are carrying emotionally as a result of all the interactions they're involved with is really key. Because what we found in the Flourishing in Ministry research is that burnout sneaks up on pastors. It builds outside of their awareness through kind of a mild and moderate phase, and then hits a threshold of severity, and then boom, we're aware of it all of a sudden, and then it becomes costly in terms of emotionally, relationally, physically, or even vocationally, as you know so well. And so how do we prevent that? Well, we prevent that by paying attention to the buildup and having people in our lives that help us to see those early warning signs in ourselves, and then working on emotional self-regulation kinds of competencies, which are similar to kind of emotional intelligence, if you or your listeners are familiar with that concept.
Yeah.
Really taking time and having support around me, some of which is outside of my congregation, to just grow that competency. It's such a challenging deal to be in pastoral leadership right now.
I'm curious. I remember Rick Warren, he said to develop some of these rhythms in our life, you have to divert daily, withdraw weekly, and abandon annually. And
yes.
One of the things I know on your website with Flourishing Ministry, you say coaching ministry leaders into daily well-being, resilience, thriving, and authenticity. So as you're trying to speak to pastors, and we have pastors who are listening, I'm curious what that looks like. Is this a daily practice? Because sometimes we're going to deal with our stuff at our next therapy appointment if we have one, or
right.
on that vacation that's coming up this summer. But it feels like our needs are always being pushed out to the next thing. Is it possible to have this daily well-being, and what does that look like? How do you actually create that space to do that?
Such a great question. We chose daily well-being because what we found is that's the first thing that gets low for pastors out of all the dimensions of our flourishing ministry model. That just that basic sense of having a decent day, not necessarily the greatest day in your life or anything, but feeling pretty good physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, vocationally. And that's not every day. That's not realistic in life or ministry, certainly, and not promised to us in Scripture. So we're not suggesting some sort of Pollyanna, once you follow Jesus and become a pastor, everything is sunshine and rainbows and that sort of thing. But what does the abundant life look like? What does sustained positivity look like? That's grounded in the hope of the gospel, but actually works its way out in our daily practices. So what we are finding is that yes, it's a daily commitment to really a rule of life, which is a concept we get from Benedictine spirituality, that we can engage in a rhythm of practices and be intentional about that. that prevent the difficulty that we know clergy face in terms of physical health and emotional health challenges, and promote daily well-being and flourishing. And many of those practices, the more recent research globally is telling us are ancient Christian spiritual practices. So contemplative practices in particular, things like silence, solitude, centering prayer, breath prayer, those kinds of things. And we think in part because in those kinds of spiritual practices, you're just listening to God, just being with God, just receiving from God, not having to sort of do anything in a religious performance kind of way as part of the practice, which is what pastors have to do all the time. And so just step outside of that role and just be a person, excuse me, be a son of God, a daughter of God, and just be with God and have communion with God is a really important practice. The other one that I really like is we're finding it's really important for pastors to play. We know there's a point of diminishing returns with work for any job, that at a certain point you can press through and finish if you put in the 50-hour week, you can do the 20 more hours or whatever it is, and you will get some things done. But if you take time to rest, to rejuvenate, to play, to connect with people that you're close to, you would come back to that same work with exponentially higher efficiency, creativity, productivity. So there's a point of diminishing returns for all of us where it actually is doing something for the church, for our family, to step away and take a break. So if people can do something that's a hobby that takes their full concentration to do it, that they love doing and they have some skill in doing, then at least 20, 30 minutes a week is a bare minimum. Then that can make a big difference over time. Because what happens when we do something like that is that we're fully immersed in it. So you can't also be mentally working, doing sermon prep in the back of your mind, or worrying about a phone call with a board member or that person in the hospital that you're worried about or whatever it is. You can't be thinking about that and doing this activity. You have to be all in, and it helps us take a full physical and mental break in a holy detachment kind of way from ministry work. And the good news is, Matt, what we're finding is that small steps done frequently and consistently really make a difference over time. So literally things like 5 minutes of silence, a 15-minute, 20-minute walk at a moderate pace 2 or 3 times a week, done consistently over time, really do have a positive accumulation and make a big difference to daily well-being and flourishing.
Yeah, I've heard that if you work with your mind, then relax with your hands. And if you work with your hands, relax with your mind.
Oh, that's good.
To be able to, take something out there that is a little bit different, using a different part of your brain, and helps you to kind of process things a little bit differently. Is it possible to be flourishing in ministry and not have a ministry that's flourishing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I certainly hope so. No, I think it is. I think we have to redefine what flourishing in ministry means in terms of sort of what metrics do we use for kind of effectiveness and success. For example, I was talking with a pastor recently at a retreat, and his role in his particular denomination at this point is to help churches that are a dying congregation, basically help them finish well and close well, and figure out what to do with the property and so forth that's meaningful and missional, that kind of thing. And it's sort of like being a hospice chaplain for congregations that are closing or something like that.
Sure.
And he's not going to get the Church Growth Award this year, but it's incredibly sacred, holy, phenomenal pastoral work that he's doing, helping people grieve, celebrating what God has done in the community through that particular church over however many years or decades, and repurposing property and those kinds of things. And I think he's flourishing. in terms of from a kingdom work perspective. He really is. And so we have to rethink maybe flourishing and effectiveness as fruitfulness, faithfulness, those kinds of things. Especially as we look at the decline of attendance, and there are just so many variables outside of a pastor's control in our culture right now that are affecting the ways we've typically measured church quote-unquote success, that I do think we have to rethink that.
If you look at all of the ministry conferences that are out there and available for pastors, it's all about the flourishing ministry, like to have a growing church and to be bustling. And it's just a different mindset that, we have to, what does it look like to grow? But we also are just living in this age where we have so many that are tapping out, whether they're choosing that for themselves, or they've had a moral failure and they find their way out and they're shown the door. What about, there's been a lot of research that has gone into this. So you're not just, this is not we feel like people are struggling. There's actually been scientific research, and over 20,000 ministry leaders. You guys have done, there's science behind this. I'm curious what the data has shown you, because I would approach this as like, well, it feels like there's a lot of people who are struggling based on how many emails and phone calls I'm getting lately. But what's the difference, and what are your gleanings from looking at this through a more academic approach?
Yeah. So pre-COVID, we were confident in saying that at any given moment, about a third of ministry leaders were in moderate to severe burnout at any given time. So about a third, and then. Almost all ministry leaders, pastors, will sort of dip into mild, maybe a little bit of moderate burnout every now and then over the course of a career, much like other helping professions do as well. So physicians, therapists, teachers, etc., social workers.
Right.
And we think the rate of clinical depression among clergy pre-COVID was a couple percentage points higher than the general population of North America, and the rate of depression, best we can tell, of clergy spouses is higher than that of clergy, which is higher than that of the general population. And sometimes people are surprised by that. Pastors typically aren't surprised by that when I tell them that, because most of them have been through a season of feeling some symptoms of depression or anxiety, largely induced by just the rigors of the work that they do. There are lots of reasons for that: physiology of stress, psychologically being immersed in other people's loss all the time, and there's a occupational stress theory, to get academic here for a second, that we came across in doing some of this research that kind of crystallized some things for me. It's called effort-reward imbalance theory, and the idea is that if you have a job with high effort in certain kinds of ways, all of which map onto pastoral ministry, I think, and low reward in certain kinds of ways, then it's a recipe for burnout, depression, and the kinds of physical health problems that clergy seem to have a prevalence of, that are all stress-related, like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, those kinds of things. And I think it just is, as a job, and I know it's more than a job, so I'm not trying to reduce it to that, but if you look at it the way an occupational psychologist looks at a job, it's a setup in many ways for the kinds of things that we see pastors struggling with. And so we have to be really, really intentional about counteracting the reasons for that. Probably more even than other helping professions in some ways.
Yeah. So I know that a big part of the mission of Flourishing in Ministry is to prevent that burnout. But is there a point in time where you say that perhaps the best thing for you to do for your own health, for the health of your family, and just overall well-being, is that you might want to think about stepping away from ministry and now experiencing that life after ministry season? And what are the indicators that start to show up that you would start to say, this season for you might be coming to a close?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's always difficult, of course, because it's an identity. It's not just a job, and so it's a really difficult choice to step away from something you feel God has called you to. And but I think there are a number of things that would lead me to at least have that conversation with someone. One is to how impaired are they through burnout, depression, whatever it may be, that they're just not able to be on their A game, and how is that showing up? Sometimes it's very evident to everybody else around them, and they're getting feedback about that, and sometimes they know it as well. And it's going to take time. It took time to create the challenges, and so it takes time to recover and go through restoration in some way. And it's very difficult for that to happen if it's to a point of severity. It's difficult for that to happen while a person is still in an active ministry role, and much easier if they can be in a less stressful way to pay the bills in some way that's maybe still meaningful and still have meaningful outlets for ministry. So they're not out of ministry in the sense of being, participating with God's work in the world in some way, but take a break from the incredibly complex stresses that bear down upon the clergy role long enough to pay attention to physical health and emotional health recovery, relational issues, marital issues, all those kinds of things. Certainly if there's an active addiction of some kind that a person has sort of lost control over. One of the most frequent ones we see for clergy is sexual addiction, because it's more of a process addiction, meaning it's about becoming addicted to the brain's own internal chemical processes that boost our mood, so dopamine and adrenaline and some other things that are involved in sexual arousal, versus being addicted to like cocaine or crystal meth or something, or even alcohol. That's much less common for clergy because that's sort of taboo, but finding ourselves engaged in food addiction, sex addiction, pornography, even workaholism in a way is a form of process addiction too. And so if an addiction's out of control and really needs clinical treatment, that's another sign that it probably is a good time to take a step back and reevaluate some things. And if a pastor's family is really, if their marriage is in crisis, it depends on the reasons, but those are all some of the big warning signs to me. And there are a number of others I'm going to talk about.
Yeah. Tell me about just the work of Flourishing in Ministry. What do you guys do? How do you come alongside? And what is that ministry? Even the genesis of why did this get started?
Yeah, well, it started, I have to give credit to a dear friend, Dr. Matt Bloom, who started this research over a decade ago and handed it off. And his wife is pastor, and he had lived life as a clergy spouse and had studied well-being at work and helping professions kind of more broadly, and then decided to study the well-being of clergy in a positive psychology kind of way, which is to say, study what's right with pastors who are flourishing or seem to be as best anybody can, and what are the factors, conditions, practices that are leading to that, and then what can we learn from that could help everybody, and how do we build those things into the lives of every pastor, sort of idea. So the research is still ongoing, and right now we're doing a deep dive into women in ministry, looking at the unique kinds of challenges that they face. So stay tuned for more of that. And then on the practical application side, we've translated all of that research into a Flourishing in Ministry coaching certification. So people can go through our training, which is accredited by the International Coaching Federation, which is kind of the gold standard globally for the coaching world, to become a Flourishing in Ministry coach and come alongside other leaders and help them create some goals around their well-being in all these key areas that we've identified, and how do they pay attention to their own formation. And we now know from research what are the practices that we need to do with a certain frequency and duration to help boost our own well-being over time. Is we can help people be really strategic about that from the research. And we also have a bunch of people that have been through that training, so we now have a network of coaches and providing individual and group coaching for all kinds of ministry leaders all over the place. Been really amazed at how God has used that. It's in a preventative way. If people are in crisis, sometimes coaching also is helpful to get them to the right kind of crisis intervention or therapist if that's needed. But by and large, people find that it's really helpful just to have that safe space to think out loud with another person who gets your world, and gets what it's like on the inside of being a pastor, to come up with some goals around your formation and your flourishing. That's less focused on sort of skill development. There's a lot of great coaching out there for that in terms of leadership skills and pastoral skills, and it's needed, and there's great stuff out there for that. We're more focused on the formation and well-being, flourishing of the person in the midst of all of that.
That's great. If somebody's listening right now and they're thinking to themselves, I think I have something to offer and I can help somebody with this, and the coaching part, becoming a coach sounds like a good next step for them. Or there's somebody listening saying, I need a coach. I do not feel like I'm flourishing, and I'm not sure what that next step is. What is that next step for them to get involved?
Thank you. They can go to our website at www.flourishinginministry.org. And if you want a coach, you can click on Get a Coach, or you can click on Become a Coach. We have a training cohort starting in January of 2024. If you want to get in on that. And I should say too, Matt, one of the things I've seen, a number of people that have gone through our training ended up transitioning into doing coaching full time, because there's skills that pastors already are doing. Like a lot of the time, pastors will go through our training like, I've been doing this for 30 years of my ministry. I just didn't know it was like a researched set of competencies, and that you can actually get certified in these skills that pastors use all the time. And so they use our training to minister to other ministry leaders, but then they also end up doing coaching with all kinds of people. And it ends up being a good way to continue to love people, invest in people, and also take a break from the kind of the rigors of leading a church.
I love that. Well, thank you for joining me. I feel like we had our own version of carpool karaoke, and
nice.
Just let's drive. Let's drive to the office with Chris Adams this morning. And so,
that's right.
Thank you. This is great. Really, a resource out of Biola's Rosemead School of Psychology, and it's an incredible ministry. And for pastoral transitions, we're not ambulance chasers looking for all the people. We just hope that people fail out so that business booms. But really, our hope is to prevent pastoral transitions.
Absolutely.
And I think our hearts are aligned there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. So much believe in what you're doing, and may the Lord bless your efforts and bless the folks that are listening to this, and renew them and give them what they need to flourish in life and in ministry and in work. And I just really appreciate the opportunity, especially letting me do it from the car.
Yeah, absolutely. We're up for everything here. Chris Adams, thanks for coming on the Life After Ministry podcast. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Life After Ministry podcast. If you are navigating a ministry transition, or you're in a ministry leadership role and you see a change on the horizon, the worst thing you could do is do this alone. We have 2 Facebook groups that are designed just for you. One is called Life After Ministry, and it's a group that offers community and support for those who are in transition. The other one is called the Elder Hub, and it's a resource center for ministry leaders. These communities are designed to give you insight, advice, and answers for your questions. We also have pastoraltransitions.com, and there you'll find articles on everything from messaging transition from the pulpit to what does it actually look like to become a community known by our love in every season. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast Your support helps us extend our reach and communicate this message. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Shalom.